surrogacy.com, and I'd like to welcome you back to the next segment in my gestational surrogacy video diaries. Today we're going to be talking about contracts. I have been matched officially for my fourth and final journey as a surrogate mother, and now all the information that we've agreed upon is going to go to our lawyers to finalize the contracts. Now, this is my fourth journey, and I am using the same lawyer that I have used in my 3 previous journeys. I trust him, I know he knows his stuff, and he's worked with me enough that he puts up with my little idiosyncrasies. My intended parents do not live in the state that I live in. They do not live in the state where the baby will be born. You always want to find lawyers in the state where the baby will be born. So they don't actually have a lawyer. What I've done is I've called my lawyer and I've asked him to make some referrals to the intended parents. Well, he did, and they've settled upon an attorney for them to use. And we're actually going to have my lawyer write the contract. They're paying him a little extra. He's writing the contract and representing me, and their lawyer will be representing them and going over the contract with them in detail. It's always very important that the surrogate mother has her own lawyer and her own representation. The intended parents do pay for that cost, but it is very important that you have your own lawyer, not just to help you look over the contract, but to actually represent you through the entire journey, so that if anything goes wrong, or if you have any questions, or you need anything through your journey, you've got legal counsel to go to. So my lawyer is preparing the contracts. He has not done this before. He has prepared the legal paperwork with the court system for my intended parents in the past, but he's actually never done the contracts before. So this will be interesting. There are a few important things that you need to remember to put in your contract. Your lawyer will, I'm sure, go over all of this. Most people think straight away that the money might be an issue. It's not. If you've gotten to the point where you're doing contracts, you've already agreed upon the money expenses, the compensation, expenses for reimbursements, travel, that type of thing. So you'll just hand that over to your lawyer and they'll put that into the contract or into an amendment. The really important things that you need to think about in the contract are things like, what happens to the baby if the surrogate mother were in an accident of some sort and has to be put on life support? Is that something that she is capable of allowing to happen to her? Does she and her family feel that staying on life support until the baby were viable would be an option? Or is that something that for religious reasons or personal reasons you don't think you'd want to do? That's something you need to discuss. What happens if during the course of the pregnancy the intended parents get into an accident and they pass away? Who takes the baby? They need to have a provision in the contract for who they'd like to take their child in the event that they are no longer with us. Then you have to think about things like, how many embryos are you planning to transfer? This was always a big sticking point with me because I have had twins as a surrogate mother and I've had 2 singletons. Every time that they've ever put an embryo in, it has resulted in a healthy, full-term live baby. For that reason, there is no way on earth I would ever put in more than 2 embryos. If I found a set of intended parents that wanted to put in 3 embryos, I would pass, because that's not something I'm comfortable with. Which brings up the next point, which is selective reduction and abortion. That needs to be clearly stated in the contract what will happen if the doctors advise if the doctors advise that you reduce the number of embryos or fetuses that you're carrying because maybe you have quadruplets or septuplets or octuplets, and you need to know ahead of time what you'll do in that situation. It's important to note at the end of the day, a woman's body is her body. And you cannot force a woman to get an abortion. You cannot force her to selectively reduce, but it needs to be clearly stated what the intent is ahead of time. If a woman a surrogate mother were to say that she was going to reduce if the intended parents and the doctor agreed that that was something that they wanted to do, and if the time came and she was not willing to do that, no court on earth would make her reduce. However, the courts would say that she could be held financially liable for the breach in contract. The contract needs to clearly state what happens if one of the parties is in breach. The contract needs to clearly state what happens if the baby ends up being the biological child of the gestational surrogate instead of the biological child of the intended parents. That does happen, where surrogate mothers do not follow the contract, which clearly states that you have to abstain from sexual relations for several weeks prior to and after the transfer. If you don't do that and you end up pregnant with your own child, the contract needs to state what happens. Usually, the surrogate mother takes her own child home and reimburses the intended parents for every single expense made through the entire surrogacy journey. That's quite common. The contract also needs to state how long you're going to be going through this. Are you going to do 3 transfers? Okay, great. How long? Is that going to be 3 transfers in the next 9 months, the next 18 months, the next 2 years? The contract needs to have some sort of an end. An end usually comes with either a live baby, an abortion or a miscarriage, or a specified time period, like for instance, 3 tries, 3 transfers in up to 9 months. That's what my contract states. So it's very important that there is some sort of an end. And then it's also important that you have a way of getting out of the contract. If you find that, after the first transfer you want to walk away, the contract should state that you can do that without any further financial repercussions from either the intended parents or the surrogate mother. So those are important points. Let's see. Also multiples. What happens when you do get pregnant with twins or triplets or quadruplets? The contract needs to clearly state what you're willing to carry. Just because selective reduction might be an option or abortion for genetic defects might be an option, you kind of need to know ahead of time that if the intended parents do not, under any circumstances, want to send twins, for instance, you'd want to know that. Most people are willing to carry twins or triplets. But if there was a situation where the intended parents did not want them for some reason, you'd want to know those things ahead of time and have those in the contract. And then it's also important to realize that the entire contract phase takes time. Once the attorney draws up the contract, depending on whose attorney it is, usually if it's the intended parent's attorney, and it usually is, they get to see the contract first, and they send it back to the attorney for any changes that they want to be made or any questions that they have to go through that. So it goes back and forth with them for a while, and then it gets sent over to the other party. In this case, I saw the contract first, and I went through that with my lawyer, and then it got sent to the intended parents, who made an appointment and went through the contract with their lawyer. So that process takes time. The shortest contract I've ever had was 3 weeks. The longest contract I've ever had was 3 months, and we walked away at that point. I've mentioned this in one of my previous videos that the first set of intended parents, before I had done my first surrogacy, my very, very first experience with surrogacy, I had met a local couple, and we decided to proceed, so we each got our lawyers and got the contract phase started. I happen to have the same lawyer that I am working with now, and I would never work with another lawyer because of how well he represented me during this first botched journey. We never actually did make it past the contract phase. The contract phase took over 3 months, and at the end, we decided to part company because of a very, very simple and pretty silly thing, I think. Had nothing to do with money. There was a little piece in the contract that stated that there would be a DNA test done after the birth of the child. And if the DNA did not match both the intended mother and the intended father, that they had the option of giving me the child or keeping it. And either way, I would have to pay back all of the expenses, including the lawyers, the agency, all of the clinic fees, all of the everything that they had spent on the entire journey. I would have to pay them back, and they could either leave me with the child or keep the child. Here's the problem. The biological mother was actually an egg donor. The intended mother was not using her own eggs. So it was quite clear from the onset that the intended mother would not be found to be the biological mother. So we suggested that they remove the 2 words and mother, to take that part out, that we would say yes, if indeed it was found that the intended father was not the biological father of the child. I'm more than willing to sign that, of course. If it was my child, that'd be one thing. Or if there was a clinic error and the clinic, made the mistake and it wasn't my child, I didn't want to have to be responsible for all those fees if the clinic gave us the wrong embryo. But they weren't willing to take out the part that said that the mother had to be the biological relation as well. And it's got to be so silly. I mean, this was found, this little tiny error was found among a few other little tiny wording changes in the first week of me having that contract. And over time, everything else got changed, but at the end, they absolutely refused to change that part. And to this day, I have no idea why. I mean, it seemed like it was a way for them to have an out. If they got a child that, heaven forbid, had some sort of birth defect that they did not want to deal with as a couple, they could literally stick me with the child, so to speak, and I'd have to pay them, upwards of $50,000 on all the fees that they had spent thus far for the privilege of raising their child. And that didn't make sense to me. It was a way that my family was going to be in jeopardy if I chose to proceed with that contract. So I made the decision to walk away from that. And so that's an example of a contract taking over 3 months. It should not take that long. It usually takes between 1 and 2 months. And if there's issues at that point in the contract where you can't iron them out, it's good to know then so that you're able to walk away. Because you certainly don't want to sign a contract that you're uncomfortable with. You don't want to sign a contract that has wording in there that you don't understand. That's what your lawyer is for. So the contract phase, and it's also another point that I want to make for contract phase, is it can be a little intimidating. You know, you'll say something to your lawyer, and by the time it gets through the other lawyer and back to your intended parents, it sounds like the world is dying and the sky's falling down, and it just gets blown out of context very quickly. So it's very important during the contract phase that, yes, you are communicating with your lawyer about all issues in the contract, but also make sure that you talk to your intended parents, not necessarily about what changes need to be made in the contract, that will all go through the lawyers, but just to keep them in the loop and to make sure that they know that, hey, everything's really okay. I don't know what it sounds like from your end, but it kind of sounded scary from my end, the way that people are, talking, and, well, this is a no-go. We're not proceeding with this contract unless this is fixed. And it gets very, very business-like, and it can be a hard time. It's very stressful for both the surrogate mother and the intended parents during the contract phase, and that's normal. It will pass. It does get easier after the contracts are signed. So with that, I will conclude this video on getting the contracts and getting them signed, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Thank you.